She stood trembling at the podium while the richest man in the room glared. Yet her voice rose louder than his gold. The city hall chamber smelled of leather, steel, and freshly printed agendas. It reeked of wealth. And there, beneath the shimmering chandeliers that had never been meant for girls like her, Morgan Hayes straightened her back. The microphone crackled, as if unsure whether it wanted to carry her voice. But Morgan, poor and invisible all her life, refused to be quiet. Not today. Behind her, the row of spectators, most wearing the gray suits of investors or the bitter silence of evicted neighbors, watched with the stunned disbelief of those witnessing a storm approach. In front of her, seated like a king upon glass and chrome, was Graham Everett. Every headline called him a visionary. Every bank account called him untouchable. Every building downtown whispered his name in concrete. He didn't need to raise his voice to silence a room. He just had to breathe. Morgan had never met a man so powerful or so terrifying. Yet it wasn't the man who scared her. It was the memory of her mother's hand, trembling as she folded the last eviction notice and whispered, "We have nowhere left to go." She glanced down at the scribbled notes on the crumpled paper in her hand, then tore them in half. This wasn't a speech. This was survival. "Mr. Everett," she began, her voice quaking but clear, "you build towers that kiss the sky, but you've never looked down long enough to see who you're standing on." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Graham didn't blink. His fingers steepled before his mouth, watching her the way one watches fire. Beautiful, dangerous, maybe worth extinguishing. "My name is Morgan Hayes. You don't know me. You don't know my street. But my home, where my mother taught me to pray for people who don't see us, is one of the houses your company wants to tear down next week." The mayor shifted uncomfortably. Someone cleared their throat. Morgan pressed forward. "You say you're building a future, but all I see is a graveyard of our memories." Emotion cracked through her voice, but she didn't stop. She told them about her brother's asthma, made worse by the construction dust, about the neighbors who had already vanished under silence and shame. She told them about her father's photo, nailed to the wall, the only thing that hadn't crumbled when the foundation shifted from the blasting down the block. Every word was a stone thrown at a glass tower. Across the chamber, Graham Everett shifted for the first time. He whispered something to his assistant. Cameras clicked. One of the investors sighed and stood to leave, but Morgan's next words froze him mid-step. "My mother begged me not to speak today. She said no one listens to girls like me. But even if you don't hear me, I want my voice recorded here. Because someday, when your buildings are crumbling and your glass is shattered, maybe someone will dig up this recording and remember that we existed." That line, that moment. The room inhaled sharply. Graham Everett's jaw tightened. It wasn't just a defiance. It was the truth. Raw, unfiltered, human. A silence thicker than cement fell. Then Graham leaned forward. His face, still unreadable, held no rage, no mockery, just the faintest shadow of something else. Curiosity? Disbelief? Recognition? He didn't smile. He didn't applaud. He said one word. "What?" That was all. One syllable. But to Morgan, it didn't sound like dismissal. It sounded like the crack in a wall. And in that instant, as the officials shuffled papers and the press rushed to record sound bites, Morgan Hayes understood something she never expected. She had reached him. But what had she awakened? The hearing adjourned with formalities. Cameras flashed. Graham rose, nodded once to his assistant, and walked out without another glance. Morgan's heart pounded as she stepped down from the podium. The faces around her blurred. Her legs threatened to give way. But she walked out with her head high. Outside, the sky had darkened. Thunder rumbled far off. Rain kissed her cheeks, as if the heavens themselves were applauding. Yet she felt no triumph. Only the burning weight of what had begun. That night, alone in her room, Morgan replayed his voice over and over in her mind. Why? Not in scorn. Not in rage. Just why? She didn't sleep. Because deep down, she knew something that terrified her more than eviction notices and corporate threats. Graham Everett would not forget her. And that meant this war had just begun. She turned on her side in bed and stared at the peeling paint on the wall, remembering the sound of her mother's voice, fragile but firm, when she first taught Morgan to recite the family's prayer for protection. It was always the same. Let them see us. Let them hear us. Let them know we belong. Tonight, she wasn't sure whether anyone truly saw her. But Graham had heard her. and the way his voice echoed in her head, asking why, felt more dangerous than any silence he could have offered. She got up and sat at the small wooden desk where her younger brother once scribbled drawings of spaceships and dragons before their world began to collapse. She opened her notebook and began writing. Not a speech this time, but a letter to herself. A vow that no matter how powerful Graham Everett was, no matter how high his buildings climbed, she would not be erased. The weight of the moment returned as she glanced at the news on her cracked phone screen. The local blog already had a headline: "Poor girl challenges power at council meeting." Comments poured in, some praising her, others mocking. But one caught her eye. It read, "She won't last a week." Morgan stared at the words, and something inside her steeled. If they expected her to vanish, they'd have to bury her voice first. She didn't cry. Not this time. Instead, she whispered into the darkness, "This is how it starts." And outside, the rain continued to fall. Graham's haunting question, "Why?" lingers in Morgan's mind, signaling the start of a deeper, more dangerous confrontation. Morgan's words echoed in the boardroom, but when the microphones died, the laughter began. The next morning, the news cycle fed on her like vultures. The same reporters who had filmed her trembling voice now replayed her speech with sarcasm. Clips of her stammering moments were looped over and over with mocking commentary. They called her the girl who challenged a king. They turned her courage into spectacle. Morgan Hayes sat on the edge of her narrow bed, staring at the flickering images on her cracked phone. Every broadcast burned deeper. Her brother watched silently from the doorway, his small eyes wide with confusion. "You did the right thing," he whispered. She wanted to believe that, but outside their walls, right and wrong were luxuries they couldn't afford. By noon, the city's gossip had transformed her into a warning. At the cafe where she worked, whispers followed her like shadows. Co-workers avoided her. A regular customer left no tip and muttered, "You should have kept quiet." Her manager, a kind but frightened woman named Rosa, pulled her aside. "They called from corporate," she said. "Mr. Everett's people have contracts with our suppliers. They told us to reconsider who we hire." Morgan nodded slowly. "So I'm fired." Rosa hesitated, tears in her eyes. "I can't lose my job too, Morgan." She left the cafe without her final paycheck. Outside, the autumn wind carried the smell of roasted coffee and exhaust, but to her it smelled like endings. Her mother called from home. "Don't come back yet," she said, voice trembling. The landlord came by with two men. "They said we have a week to leave." A week. Morgan stopped at a bus stop and sat on the bench, feeling the weight of invisible eyes. Across the street, a black car idled too long. She looked away. That evening, she returned to the community meeting where she had first spoken. The hall was half empty. The same neighbors who had clapped for her the night before now avoided her gaze. One of them, Mrs. Talbot, a woman who had once shared her bread, whispered, "You shouldn't have gone against him, child. He's not like other men. He'll destroy you." Morgan forced a smile. "Then let him try." But inside, fear crawled under her skin. The board meeting came 2 days later. Graham Everett sat at the head of a polished mahogany table, surrounded by his legal team. When Morgan entered the room, invited under the pretense of community dialogue, the air was already thick with disdain. She stood, clutching the same torn notes she had carried before. "Mr. Everett," she began, "you said you want to hear my proposal." He cut her off. "No, Miss Hayes. I wanted to hear you admit that you were wrong." The lawyers laughed softly. One of them, a tall man in an expensive gray suit, leaned toward her and whispered loud enough for the room to hear, "The girl with nothing to lose." Her throat tightened. She tried to respond, but the microphone cut off. Someone had turned it off deliberately. The sound of laughter filled the boardroom, cruel and echoing. Morgan's hands trembled around the dead mic. "You think courage makes you powerful," Graham said evenly, rising from his chair. "But you've mistaken a stage for a battlefield. The city doesn't need martyrs. It needs results." He turned away, ending the meeting. His assistant guided her toward the exit, his hand firm on her shoulder. "You should go, Miss Hayes," he said, "before you make things worse." Outside the glass tower, reporters waited. They thrust microphones at her face, firing questions like bullets. "Did you threaten Mr. Everett? Do you have evidence of corruption? Are you seeking attention?" Morgan tried to speak, but her voice broke. Her words came out twisted, incomplete. Within hours, edited clips flooded social media. Headlines painted her as unstable. The truth was swallowed whole. That night, her mother refused to open the door for a reporter who knocked and shouted her daughter's name. Her younger brother cried, asking why people hated them now. Morgan could not answer. The next morning, graffiti appeared on their building. Liar. Troublemaker. The neighbors who once greeted them now crossed the street. One old man spat near her feet. You brought this on us. Her phone buzzed with unknown numbers, each message colder than the last. Some threatened her life. Others promised she would vanish quietly. By evening, the mailman delivered an official notice. Eviction order. Property to be vacated within 72 hours. Her mother collapsed into a chair. Morgan took the paper silently, her vision blurring. The law had spoken. The city had chosen its side. That night, as darkness swallowed the street, she packed boxes without knowing where they would go. Every sound outside made her flinch. The laughter from the boardroom echoed in her ears. She replayed Graham's words over and over. The city doesn't need martyrs. Was she becoming one? At midnight, she sat by the window, the city lights blinking in the distance. Her resolve wavered. Maybe her mother had been right. Maybe no one listened to girls like her. Maybe silence was safer than truth. But then she remembered the faces of the children who played on her block, the ones whose laughter would soon be buried beneath concrete. If she quit now, she would teach them that silence wins. The wind howled through the cracks of the window pane. The clock struck 1. Suddenly, a sharp noise shattered the stillness. A car door slamming outside. Then heavy footsteps. She froze. The knock on the door wasn't polite. It was thunderous, violent. Her mother gasped. Don't open it. But Morgan moved toward the door, her pulse hammering. Who's there? She demanded. No answer. Just breathing on the other side. Then, under the crack of the door, an envelope slid through. White. Plain. No return address. Morgan bent down, picked it up, and stared. Her name was scrawled across the front, in uneven letters. Her mother clutched her shoulder. Don't, she whispered. But Morgan tore it open. One piece of paper. One sentence, written in thick black ink. You're next. The words bled into her mind like a curse. She stumbled back, the letter shaking in her hand. Outside, a car engine started. Tires screeched. The vehicle disappeared into the night. Her brother cried. Her mother prayed. And Morgan, standing in the half-light of their crumbling home, understood the full weight of defiance. Speaking truth had made her visible. Now, they were coming for her. In the dead of night, Morgan receives an envelope that says simply, You're next. The war she started has turned personal. She walked the empty streets she once called home, as though every shadow held a whisper of defeat. Morgan Hayes disappeared from the headlines, but not from the danger. After the envelope arrived, silence took over her life like a slow suffocation. She stopped answering calls. She stopped looking neighbors in the eye. The girl who had once stood tall in a crowded room now moved like smoke, present but unreachable. Her mother refused to let her leave the house, but Morgan knew staying was just another form of surrender. So she slipped out one morning, before dawn, with nothing but a backpack and $28. Her brother was still asleep. Her mother's tears soaked the pillow she left behind. For 2 nights, she wandered. She walked through streets layered with memory, where she once played tag with childhood friends now boarded up or displaced. Every step was a goodbye. The corner store, the bus stop, even the rusted park bench where her father once waited to walk her home from school. All of it felt like a fading photograph. On the 3rd night, she knocked on the door of Miss Adelaide, the retired piano teacher who once taught her Chopin and fed her sweet tea when life at home became unbearable. Adelaide opened the door, frail but fierce-eyed, and without a word, led her to the spare room. Morgan slept hard that night, surrounded by the ticking of an old grandfather clock and the soft hum of vinyl records. In the morning, Adelaide made her toast and tea and handed her a slip of paper with 3 addresses. They need help with cleaning, maybe gardening. Nothing glamorous, but it's honest. So Morgan worked. She scrubbed mold from bathroom tiles. She trimmed overgrown hedges with dull shears. She swept fallen leaves from empty porches. The money barely covered a meal, but it was something she earned, something no one could take. In the evenings, she returned to Adelaide's and wrote in her notebook. She wrote about the street she came from, about the neighbors who vanished under the weight of silence, about the dreams she once had to open a school for girls like her. She wrote about her mother's hands, cracked, warm, steady, and her brother's smile, once wide and loud, now quiet and watchful. But above all, she wrote about Graham Everett. She couldn't forget the way he looked at her that day. Not like an enemy, but like a riddle. He hadn't dismissed her. He'd ask why. A single word, but it haunted her every step. One night, she returned to her old street. The house looked like it had aged decades and weeks. The lawn was overgrown, the windows boarded. No laughter, no scent of her mother's cooking, just a quiet kind of collapse. That same night, Graham Everett sat in his office, watching a security feed of the street. He saw her, just a blur under a hoodie, head down, hands in pockets. She looked small, not defeated, but distilled, like fire waiting for oxygen. His assistant entered, handing him a report. She's not speaking to the press. She's vanished. Graham nodded slowly. She's not gone. She's watching. His eyes lingered on the screen. Morgan took jobs no one wanted. She hauled trash. She cleaned storm drains. She washed windows until her knuckles bled. Each time someone looked at her with pity or suspicion, she forced a smile. She didn't need their sympathy. She needed their ignorance. Because in her silence, she was collecting. At the public library, she scoured property records. She traced the shell companies tied to Graham's developments. She printed documents, highlighted figures, created a timeline. She learned how power masked itself in paper. She found old news clippings about Graham's first tower, a collapsed foundation, a silenced workers' union, a lawsuit that vanished before reaching court. The deeper she dug, the colder her hands felt. She began storing her findings in an encrypted folder, hiding it across 3 email accounts. Adelaide never asked what she was doing, but each night placed a warm cup of tea beside her without a word. On the 6th night, Morgan stood by the window of the guest room, staring at the rain. Her breath fogged the glass. She felt the weight of her choices pressing against her ribs. Could she keep doing this? Could she carry the risk of truth alone? If she fought back again, she might win, but she might also lose everything. It was a question she couldn't answer. So she packed her things and went home. Her mother opened the door, her face gaunt with worry. Her brother didn't say a word, but threw his arms around her waist. They were still a family, scarred, fractured, but standing. Morgan helped fix the window that night. She boiled water for tea. She taped cracks in the wall. The world outside remained dangerous, but inside they held on. The next morning, she opened the front door to check the mailbox. Her breath caught. Pinned to the door was a new eviction notice, this time red stamped final. But beneath it, taped to the wood, was something else. A photograph, grainy, black and white. A snapshot of Morgan kneeling in a garden 3 nights earlier, pulling weeds. Her hoodie was up, her face obscured, but it was her. No doubt. The angle was high, distant, like someone had taken it from a rooftop. And there, in the blurred corner of the photo, half hidden in shadow, was Graham Everett. Not a lookalike, not a coincidence. Him, watching. The photo fluttered in her hand as wind caught the edge. Morgan didn't scream. She didn't call her mother. She didn't cry. She closed the door, locked it, and sat down at the kitchen table. She stared at the image. He wasn't attacking anymore. He was observing, which meant he was afraid. Morgan finds a photo pinned to her door, proof that Graham has been watching her from the shadows. The silence has become surveillance. The line between vengeance and justice blurred when Morgan opened the envelope containing Graham's confidential contract. It arrived in an unmarked brown envelope, slipped under the door like a whisper in the dark. No name, no return address, no explanation. Morgan stared at it for a long time before touching it. Her mother stood by the stove, stirring tea. Her brother sat at the table, sketching with a dull pencil. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that settled after too many storms. Morgan reached for the envelope as if it might burn her fingers. She pulled out a thick stack of papers. Legal contracts, deeds, land surveys. Her eyes scanned the header, Everett Development Group. She froze. The name jumped from the page like a threat. The documents outlined the acquisition of several city-owned properties under fake shell companies. It showed backdated permits, false signatures, and payment records tied to a city councilman known for avoiding cameras. It wasn't just a business scandal. It was criminal. Morgan felt her breath catch. These papers could destroy Graham Everett. They could also destroy her. She laid the papers out across the table. Her brother looked up from his sketch. "What's that?" She hesitated. "Something dangerous." He came over, eyes wide, scanning the pages. He didn't understand every word, but he understood enough. "You could go to jail for even having this." Morgan didn't reply. Her mother, hearing the tension, approached. She read in silence for several minutes, her hands trembling more with each turn of the page. "Who gave this to you?" she asked. "I don't know. It was just here." Her mother folded her arms. "Then burn it. We are not the kind of people who survive this kind of war." Morgan looked at her brother. He was 14, too young to bear this fear, too old to be blind to it. "We can leave," he offered. "We'll pack and go tonight. We'll find another city. Start over. And let him win." Morgan asked. "Let us live," her mother said sharply. Morgan stood up and walked to the window. Outside, a group of children kicked a soccer ball through puddles. A mother scolded her toddler. A teenager helped an old man with groceries. Life moved on, unaware of the fire she now held in her hands. Justice had always been something she believed in. But now, it looked more like a loaded weapon. She spent the next hours cross-checking the documents with the city's public registry. Everything matched. Names, addresses, dates. Only the shell companies were missing from public records, scrubbed clean. Whoever had sent her this had done their homework. But why her? She had no protection, no connections. She was not a journalist or a lawyer or politician, just a girl with a voice, and even that had nearly been silenced. As night fell, she sat at her desk, the documents spread before her like a puzzle of power. She opened her laptop, logged into the burner email she used for job applications. She typed out a message to Elliot Ramirez, an investigative journalist she remembered from a community podcast. He had once exposed a corrupt landlord and helped a displaced family find justice. Her fingers hovered above the keys. Her brother entered the room. "Are you going to do it?" "I don't know. He'll come after us." "He already has." Her brother sat on the bed. "You're not doing this for revenge, right?" Morgan shook her head slowly. "No. I'm doing this because if I stay silent now, I'll never speak again." She turned back to the laptop. In another part of the city, Graham Everett sat at a private dinner with investors. His phone buzzed once. He checked the screen. An alert from his internal legal team. Confidential files possibly compromised. He didn't react. Not visibly, but the grip on his wine glass tightened. He leaned to his assistant. "Start a trace. I want to know who has them, where they came from, and who touched them." Back in Morgan's room, her hands trembled. She uploaded the files. Double-checked the recipient. "Elliot Ramirez." She wrote, "You don't know me, but you need to see this." She clicked send. The moment the cursor spun and confirmed the message was gone, a pair of headlights flashed outside her window. A car pulled into the driveway. Black, unmarked. Her breath caught in her throat. "Mom," she called. Her mother ran in, clutching a phone. "Stay inside," Morgan whispered, pulling the curtain back slightly. The car idled. No one stepped out. Tinted windows. Engine humming like a low growl. Her brother joined them, wide-eyed. "Don't open the door," her mother said. They watched. Waited. The car didn't move. Then, slowly, the passenger window rolled down. A flash of camera light. A click, and the window rolled back up. The car reversed down the driveway. The tires turned onto the road. It disappeared into the fog. Morgan's knees gave out. She sat on the floor, heart thundering. Her mother knelt beside her. "You sent it, didn't you?" Morgan nodded. "It's done." Outside, the world resumed. But inside, a war had begun. She had made her choice. As Morgan clicks send on the email to the local journalist, a shadowy car pulls into her driveway and photographs the house. The hunt has begun. When the journalist replied, "We'll meet tonight. Bring the files," Morgan felt something she hadn't in weeks. Hope. The email came just after noon. Morgan had been pacing the kitchen, chewing at the skin around her thumb, replaying the previous night's events. Her mind refused to slow. Every moment a thunderclap of doubt. Then her phone pinged. Subject: urgent, land deal files. From Elliot Ramirez. "We'll meet tonight. Safe location. Bring the documents." Don't come alone. Morgan stared at the message until her vision blurred. She felt like the floor beneath her had shifted, but not in the way it had when everything collapsed. This was different. This was movement upward. A crack of light. Elliot Ramirez had responded. She printed the files again, twice. Made backup USBs. Stored one inside her boot and one in the lining of her bag. Her brother offered to come along, but she shook her head. I need you here. With Mom. If something goes wrong. He hugged her tightly. Don't let it go wrong. At dusk, she walked to the address. An old bookstore 2 blocks off downtown. Long closed to the public, but kept alive by one stubborn owner who liked silence and poetry. Ramirez had chosen it for privacy. He sat at the back, tucked into a booth lined with newspapers and legal pads. He looked older than on the podcast, salt and pepper beard, tired eyes, but there was a sharpness to his presence, like a blade that had seen too much use and refused to dull. Morgan Hayes, he said, standing. She nodded. You're the first person who didn't look at me like I'm a threat. You're not a threat, he said, shaking her hand. You're a story, and a threat to the right people is exactly what we need. She handed him the files. He flipped through them slowly, jaw tightening. These are real. I've seen some of this before, but never this clean. Where did you get them? Anonymous drop. That's rare. Morgan leaned in. You'll use them. I'll verify them first. Then I'll use them like a sledgehammer. But only if you're ready for what comes next. She swallowed hard. Define ready. He smiled faintly. It's not about courage. It's about endurance. You're not a threat, he said, shaking her hand. You're a story, and a threat to the right people is exactly what we need. She handed him the files. He flipped through them slowly, jaw tightening. These are real. I've seen some of this before, but never this clean. Where did you get them? Anonymous drop. That's rare. Morgan leaned in. You'll use them. I'll verify them first. Then I'll use them like a sledgehammer. But only if you're ready for what comes next. She swallowed hard. Define ready. He smiled faintly. It's not about courage. It's about endurance. When it went live, it hit hard. Not just in the city. National outlets picked it up. Local radio stations replayed clips of Morgan's City Hall speech. Photos of her resurfaced, this time with captions like the girl who fought back. Morgan walked to the store the next day, and someone stopped her. An old man with a cane. You said what we've all been thinking. Don't stop now. She didn't cry, but her throat burned with something that felt like resurrection. At a board meeting across the city, Graham Everett entered the room mid-call. His assistant whispered something in his ear. His face changed. Who? Morgan Hayes. The room stilled. One executive coughed nervously. She's trending. Graham didn't sit. He paced. Pull all our contracts in that district. I want to know how many hands touched this. I want names. And I want silence. Morgan sat with Elliot that evening, staring at the article on his laptop. Her name was spelled correctly. Her voice quoted with care. No edits. No spin. She turned to him. I thought this would feel like winning. It's not a win. It's the first real move. The real game starts now. Is that supposed to make me feel better? He chuckled. No, but it should make you feel less alone. Morgan looked out the window. The streetlights glowed amber against the dusk. People walked their dogs. A bus rumbled by. For once, the world didn't seem tilted against her. Hope, she realized, wasn't loud. It was deliberate, tactical, strategic. Elliot handed her a burner phone. Use this from now on. No personal calls. You're on his radar now. He won't come at you directly, but he'll circle. He'll look for weaknesses. You've got to be stronger than your story. She pocketed the phone. What if they stop listening again? Then we make them listen louder. Late that night, Morgan returned home. Exhaustion draped over her like a coat. Her mother met her at the door, pulled her into an embrace. I saw the article. They quoted you. You look different. Different how? Like someone who knew she mattered. Her brother grinned. My friends at school are asking for your autograph. She laughed for the first time in days. They ate together. Chicken and rice. Simple. Huh. Steady. The kind of meal that says we are still here. Afterwards, Morgan sat on the couch, flipping channels while her family slept. The local news flashed across the screen. Then national. CNN. MSNBC. The words, Everett Development, filled the bottom of the screen. Then Graham appeared. Live. Press conference. Standing before a podium with a flag behind him. Her breath caught. He didn't look shaken. He looked focused, confident, controlled. His voice was steady. Recent articles circulating in the media have presented a misleading view of my company's activities. We take community well-being seriously and have launched an internal audit to ensure compliance. Morgan leaned forward. Her heart thudded. The screen cut to a wide shot. Dozens of reporters. Flashes of cameras. Then, for the briefest second, as the camera zoomed in, Graham's eyes seemed to lock with hers. She knew it wasn't real, just a broadcast, but it felt personal. The man she had challenged was now staring back, and he knew her name. Morgan sees Graham's press conference on TV. As his eyes meet the camera, it feels like he's looking directly at her, acknowledging that she has become his threat. For the first time, Morgan felt the ground shift beneath her feet. She was standing on solid truth, not sand. The morning after the article broke, Morgan awoke to a sound she hadn't heard in weeks: silence. Not the suffocating kind, but the kind that comes after impact, when the ground stops shaking and everything waits to see what survived. She rolled over and checked her phone. 52 messages. Dozens of missed calls. Her email inbox overflowed with requests. Journalists, community leaders, activists. A trending hashtag carried her name. The image of her standing at the podium weeks ago had become symbolic, repurposed into a meme of resistance. By noon, local news anchors were parked outside her house, cautiously respectful, asking for comment. Morgan didn't speak to them. Not yet. Elliot told her to wait. Control the narrative, he said. Let them chase your truth, not define it. An hour later, her phone rang again. This time, it was the city attorney's office. A formal inquiry had been opened. An emergency council meeting was scheduled. Anonymous whistleblowers, clearly inspired by her leak, were coming forward with more documents. Inside her home, Morgan stood still as the walls seemed to exhale. Her mother, who had once begged her to stay silent, wiped her hands on her apron and whispered, "You did it." But Morgan wasn't smiling. She felt something rise in her. Not pride, but a tremor of warning. She knew power didn't fall easily. She knew the first climb was often the most dangerous, because you looked up and forgot how far you could still fall. Still, that afternoon, she agreed to one interview. A controlled conversation on community radio. Elliot sat beside her at the studio, nodding silently as she told her story in her own words. Her voice calm, clear, and relentless. She named no names. She made no accusations. She simply told the truth. Within hours, the interview had been clipped and shared online. The words that resonated most came near the end. They didn't just evict families. They tried to erase our history. But we are not dust. We are roots. Local residents began to speak up. A woman named Tanya testified at a town hall that her grandfather had been forced out without compensation. A small group of shop owners formed a coalition, calling for a review of city zoning laws. One retired inspector came forward with internal memos suggesting forged signatures. The city stirred. That week, Graham Everett's company suffered its first real tremor. Stock fell 7%. A board member resigned. Another released a statement supporting the investigation. Inside the Everett Development Building, panic rippled. Legal teams worked around the clock. PR crafted carefully worded rebuttals. But Graham was quiet. He didn't lash out. He didn't hold press conferences. He watched. He watched Morgan. The city's housing commission issued a temporary stay on demolitions related to contested properties. Morgan's eviction was paused. Not canceled, but stalled. Her mother wept when the official notice arrived. Her brother punched the air. We bought time. Morgan allowed herself a moment, a small one, to feel it. Not victory, just breath. She sat on her porch that evening, watching kids ride bikes down the street again. A neighbor waved. Another dropped off a pie. A young girl approached with wide eyes and asked, "Are you the brave lady?" Morgan knelt. "No, I'm just someone who refused to disappear." She felt herself returning, layer by layer. Her voice, her spine, her fire. Elliot reminded her of the rules. Don't mistake a crowd for a shield. This isn't over. She nodded. She wasn't naive. Hope had come at a cost. She knew safety was still a myth. But she also knew she was no longer alone. That night, she cooked dinner with her mother. They laughed. Her brother played music from his phone. For a moment, they were just a family. Not targets. Not symbols. Just people. Later, after everyone had gone to bed, Morgan stayed up, scrolling through new headlines. Then her phone rang. Unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. A smooth, professional voice. Male. Miss Hayes, I'm calling on behalf of Mr. Everett. She went still. The voice continued. He's requested a private conversation. Tomorrow. He'll meet you at a location of your choosing. Public or private. No cameras. Your choice. Morgan said nothing. The voice added. There will be no threats. No lawyers. Just a conversation. 1 hour. He says the time has come. Click. The line went dead. Morgan stared at the phone. The climb had begun, and now the mountain was staring back. Late at night, Morgan receives a call from Graham Everett's assistant. Graham wants to meet. No threats. No lawyers. Just a conversation. Her move. She went to the meeting believing she was stepping into light, but Graham slammed the door shut behind her. Morgan chose the location, a public park outside the city's central library. Broad daylight. Wide open. Cameras everywhere. She wouldn't meet a man like Graham Everett behind closed doors. He arrived precisely on time. No entourage. No security detail. Just a crisp charcoal suit and a watch that probably cost more than her entire block. He sat beside her on a concrete bench beneath the sycamore trees. For a long moment, neither spoke. You wanted this, Morgan finally said. Talk. Graham turned, studied her like she was a puzzle he hadn't solved yet. You're smarter than I thought. You thought I was poor, not stupid. He smiled faintly. I thought you were angry. That makes people predictable. But you're not here to yell. You're here to listen. I'm here to hear the lie you think I'll accept. He handed her a plain envelope. Inside, a cashier's check for $200,000 and a typed agreement. Drop the files. Drop the narrative. No admission of guilt. Just silence, starting today. Walk away with dignity and money. Morgan's breath slowed. He added, it's not a bribe. It's a compromise. Everyone wins. No more fear. Your family gets safety. I get space to clean house privately. No more blood in the water. She held the envelope. Heavy. Ticking. No one will believe this is mercy, she said. They'll never know, he replied. Because you won't tell them. She stood. Dropped the envelope on the bench. I'm not for sale. He didn't react. Just nodded. Then you'll be forgotten. Or worse, you'll be erased. She walked away without looking back. She didn't see him make a call the moment she left. The next morning, everything changed. Elliot called her in a panic. The servers are down. The site's offline. Our backups too. By noon, the independent news outlet he ran had been digitally wiped. Social accounts suspended. Articles flagged for review. Advertisers pulled out. Donors vanished. And Elliot Ramirez, mentor, guide, protector, was fired from his own organization. No official reason. Just gone. Morgan couldn't reach him for 2 days. When he finally called, his voice was hollow. They gutted us. Quietly. Efficiently. You don't fight men like this head on. Not without casualties. I'm a casualty now. No, he said. I am. You need to stay alive, Morgan. That's your job now. Community support, once strong and vocal, began to stutter. Organizers postponed rallies. Residents stopped returning her calls. Anonymous threats returned to her inbox. Someone dumped garbage on her doorstep. The city council postponed the investigation, citing logistical delays. She felt the tide pulling away, leaving her exposed. Her brother came home one afternoon with a bloodied lip. They jumped me after school. Said you ruined everything. Morgan held him as he cried. That night, he packed a small bag. I'm leaving for a while. I can't breathe here anymore. Her mother begged him to stay. Morgan did too. But he left. She sat alone in the kitchen after midnight, staring at the wall where their family photos used to hang before they'd taken them down during packing. Was this the cost of truth? Was she willing to pay it? She called Elliot again. No answer. Her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. You wanted a lead. This is the parade. Morgan didn't sleep. She stopped going outside. Stopped answering calls. Every sound at the window felt like a threat. Her mother barely spoke, her eyes clouded with fear. She began doubting everything. Elliot's advice, the movement's power, her own strength. Had she dragged her family into war without a plan to win? On the third night, she woke to silence. Not the soft kind, the kind that follows a predator. She checked her files. Her laptop screen was black. Her USB drive showed error messages. Her backups gone. Every copy of the documents vanished, but something had been left behind. On her bed was a single envelope, white, unsealed. Inside, a photograph. Her mother, sitting on a bench, but not in her neighborhood. Somewhere unfamiliar. A bus station, maybe. Eyes closed. Alone. No note. No demands. Just proof. They could reach her anywhere. Morgan sank to the floor, the photo clutched in her hands. The betrayal wasn't just Graham's. It was the silence of those who once clapped. The retreat of allies. The loss of Elliot. The vanishing of her brother. Her world wasn't crumbling anymore. It had collapsed. And now, she had to decide. Rebuild or run. Morgan wakes to find all her files erased, and a photo of her mother in an unknown location left behind. The threat has become personal, immediate, and real. She stood at the water's edge, the city lights shimmering like taunts. Everything she had fought for drifting away. The river was quiet that night. Morgan stood on the cracked embankment, arms wrapped around herself, staring at the current as if it might carry her pain downstream. The lights of the city blinked across the water like eyes watching her fail. Every whisper of wind sounded like a voice saying, "You should have stayed silent." Her phone had been off for days. Her inbox remained unopened. She didn't need more threats, more apologies, more silence. Her house was gone. That morning, she'd returned to the block, expecting to find the door sealed, maybe guards on the perimeter. Instead, she found dust. The house had been demolished overnight. No warning, no final notice, just erasure. She stood before the empty lot, hands trembling. Her childhood, her mother's kitchen, her father's photo on the wall, obliterated. The ground was scattered with splinters and shards of memory. Her mother had left for a cousin's home the night before. Her brother was still gone. Morgan stood alone. Across the city, in a sleek glass tower, Graham Everett watched the demolition feed from a private screen. No audio, just slow-motion footage of a backhoe tearing through the walls. His assistant stood nearby, silent. "She'll see it today," the assistant said. Graham didn't respond. His jaw clenched slightly. "Do you think she's done?" He clicked the screen off. Everyone breaks eventually. Morgan sat on the sidewalk near the lot until the sun was high. No one spoke to her. No one asked if she was okay. Some avoided her. A few stared. But mostly, she was invisible again. She walked to the edge of the city, toward the bridge that spanned the river. The one her father used to call the line between the haves and the lost. There, she stood for hours. She thought about what she'd sacrificed. Her name, her job, her home, her brother's safety, Elliot's career, her mother's peace. All she had left was grief. A woman passed by and paused. "Are you okay?" Morgan nodded without looking. She wasn't. She climbed down from the bridge to the river's edge. The wind picked up, tugging her coat like it wanted to carry her away. She watched the ripples and imagined letting go. Just a step. Just once. Quiet. Quick. But then she remembered her brother's voice when he asked her to be brave. Her mother's hands when she wiped tears off Morgan's face as a child. Elliot's warning. Be stronger than your story. She sank to the ground and wept. Not the angry, defiant tears of protest. These were raw, hollow, defeated. She cried until she couldn't anymore. She stayed there until the sky turned from blue to orange, then into indigo. She didn't move until her legs went numb. When she finally stood, she felt something inside her, something she hadn't admitted until now. She didn't know if she'd made anything better. Maybe Graham had been right. Maybe she had awakened a storm she couldn't control. Her steps led her back to the lot. She didn't know why. The rubble hadn't changed, but something pulled her there. She climbed through the debris, careful not to cut herself. A piece of the kitchen tile lay cracked, a corner of the old porch railing still half standing. She kicked aside plaster, ducked under a beam. Then she saw it, half buried in ash and splintered wood. A small chain glinted beneath the dust. She knelt, fingers shaking, and pulled it free. It was her mother's locket, the one she hadn't seen in weeks. The one her mother said was given by her grandmother, and hers before that. The locket was scorched, the edges melted slightly, but it was intact. She opened it. Inside, the photo was burned beyond recognition, but scratched into the inner lid, beneath the photo, was something new. 4 words. Find the door. Morgan stared at it. A message. A clue. Hope. She turned. eyes scanning the wreckage, the street, the horizon. She didn't know what the words meant. Not yet. But for the first time in days, she felt something stir inside her. Not peace. Not strength. Just motion. The story wasn't over. And if there was a door, then there had to be something on the other side. In the rubble of her demolished home, Morgan finds her mother's scorched locket with an inscription inside. Find the door. A mysterious sign that something still waits to be discovered. The keepsake glowed in her palm like a map, and suddenly Morgan knew where the door lay. The words inside the scorched locket repeated in her mind all night. Find the door. Morgan didn't sleep. She sat at the kitchen table, the locket clutched in her hand, replaying every conversation, every moment from the past months. And then it came, Elliot's voice during one of their early meetings. There's a registry, buried deep in Everett's old offices, back when they weren't digital. That's where the real ghosts live, title deeds, land grants, purchase orders they didn't want to trace. She whispered aloud, the door isn't a metaphor. At dawn, she packed her bag and left a note for her mother. Then she caught a bus 2 hours north to a small coastal town where Elliot had retreated. She hadn't heard from him in weeks. She found him in a rented cabin, surrounded by papers, maps, and a corkboard crisscrossed with red string. He opened the door slowly, eyes wary. Morgan. She didn't speak, just held up the locket. He stepped aside. Come in. Inside, the cabin smelled like old coffee and ink. Elliot's beard had grown wild. His clothes hung loose. But his mind, his eyes, were still sharp. I figured you'd come, he said. They tried to break you. I worried they had. Morgan sat down. You were right about the old registry. He pulled out a dusty folder. I've been digging while you went dark. There's a storage annex tied to Everett's original firm. Locked up, off the books. They never digitized it. He didn't want anyone finding it. They poured over the files together. Mortgage swaps, land resales, trust transfers. It was complex. But one name kept appearing, James Halton, a false identity tied to over 30 illegal acquisitions. With each new document, the picture sharpened. Graham Everett had used proxy buyers to seize land that was never legally available. But it didn't stop there. Buried in a box labeled workforce, they found ledgers of wages, some missing, ID numbers that didn't match federal records, photos of construction crews, unlicensed and underaged, shipped in from out of state and hidden on job sites, slave labor conditions under luxury foundations. Morgan stared at one photo, a boy, maybe 12, hauling bricks beneath scaffolding. Her stomach turned. Elliot whispered, this isn't about gentrification anymore. It's human exploitation. They scanned everything. Duplicated backups. Secured files with encryption. This time, they wouldn't be caught off guard. Morgan stared at the evidence. This is how we end him. No. Elliot corrected. This is how he ends himself. You just shine the light. They spent the next 2 days building a secure presentation. Elliot tapped into old journalist contacts. A media consortium agreed to a public drop, with protection. The night before the press conference, Morgan returned home. Her mother greeted her at the door, speechless. Her brother had called. He was safe, staying with a friend. He'd heard about the upcoming reveal. I'm proud of you, he said through the phone. Morgan ate dinner quietly. Her appetite had returned. So had her calm. Later that night, she checked her email one last time. Then her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She answered. A pause. Then a voice she recognized. Graham Everett. You found the door, he said. Morgan said nothing. He continued. You think evidence makes you safe. But paper can be burned. Crowds can be turned. You're afraid, she said. No, he replied. I'm angry. And you'll regret this. Click. The line went dead. Morgan didn't tremble. She powered down the phone, backed up her files, packed her bag for the morning. Because the door had been opened. And now the truth was coming through. On the eve of the public reveal, Morgan receives a call from Graham. You'll regret this. His calm is gone. His fear now wears the face of fury. She walked into the auditorium with the weight of her people behind her, ready to speak to the world. The city auditorium buzzed with anticipation. News vans lined the street. Community members packed the seats, their whispers building like a storm behind closed doors. Morgan stood in the hallway, her hand on the cold metal of the entrance handle. Her heart didn't race. It beat steady, deliberate. Elliot stood beside her, papers tucked under his arm. Once we go in, we don't stop. We don't look back, she replied. They pushed through the doors and the room erupted in flashes, voices, and attention. But Morgan didn't flinch. She walked straight to the podium, Elliot following. Her mother sat in the front row, her brother beside her, both alive, present, watching. The mayor introduced the hearing. Today we examine allegations that affect not only our trust, but our city's future. Then, the microphone was hers. Morgan took a deep breath. When I first spoke here, I was scared. I stood at this podium with nothing but truth in my hands. And I was dismissed, mocked, threatened. She paused, letting the silence soak in. But I'm still here. Because truth doesn't evaporate. It waits. It grows. And eventually, it demands to be seen. She nodded to Elliot, who cued a slideshow on the screen behind her. Documents, photos, footage, all carefully verified. Each one a piece of a story the city had ignored for too long. This is not about one man, she continued. This is about a system built on shadows. But today, we bring it into the light. The room shifted. People leaned in. Journalists scribbled notes. Camera crews zoomed in. Elliot followed with a presentation of the investigation. Graham shell companies, illegal acquisitions, labor violations. Eyewitnesses testified via video. A former city planner stepped forward with a sworn statement. The picture was undeniable. Then Graham struck back. His legal team interrupted with injunctions. A lawyer stood, objecting to the evidence. A man from his PR team handed out statements to discredit Morgan and Elliot. A tweet from Graham's official account claimed the entire event was a politically motivated smear. But Morgan didn't waver. She stepped back to the podium. They'll say this is personal. And it is. It's personal to every family forced out of their home. To every child who watched their parents break under the weight of lies. To everyone who believed no one would ever speak up for them. A murmur of agreement moved through the audience. She locked eyes with the mayor. I was that girl who had nothing to lose. But now I have something to protect. This truth. This city. This chance. The mayor didn't speak, but he leaned forward. Elliot handed over a final folder. Inside, signed affidavits. A list of properties with fraudulent titles. A letter from a whistleblower in Graham's own company. Morgan stepped back. The room was still, absorbing. Her mother stood, slowly. Then her brother. Then others. One by one, the crowd rose. It wasn't applause. It was presence. Proof she wasn't alone anymore. Journalists captured all. The moment resistance turned into movement. Morgan looked out over the room, at the faces who now saw her not as a symbol, but a leader. And then, Graham entered. No security. No entourage. Just him. Calm. Composed. He walked straight to the podium. The room fell to whispers. I was told I could speak, he said. The mayor nodded reluctantly. Graham took the microphone. He glanced at Morgan. Then the crowd. You win, he said simply. Gasps. Confusion. But don't forget, he added, leaning in, voice just loud enough for Morgan to hear. I held the key. He dropped something on the podium. A small, silver key. Identical to the one Morgan's father used to carry. She froze. Graham walked out without another word. Morgan stared at the key. A memory struck her. Her father locking up the community center before it closed. The only place where she ever felt seen as a child. The building had been sold years ago. Graham had bought it. Was this his surrender? Or a message? The crowd erupted with questions. Journalists demanded statements. But Morgan didn't move. Because Graham's last words weren't about defeat. They were about history. And now, she had to decide what came next. After Morgan's powerful public testimony and overwhelming support, Graham appears, admits defeat, but drops a mysterious key and warns her. You win, but don't forget, I held the key. Morgan looked at the skyline. They were tearing down his tower and building a community center in its place. And for once, she felt peace. The wrecking ball struck glass. It wasn't just a demolition. It was a declaration. The skyline that once bore Graham Everett's name in steel and shadow now crumbled by city order. The high-rise built on silence was falling, brick by brick, as cameras rolled and cheers echoed from the crowd below. Morgan stood at a distance, wrapped in a soft coat her mother had sewn when she was 12. The same street that had once watched her lose, everything now welcomed her back with nods, waves, and eyes full of gratitude. Investigations had begun just days after the hearing. City and federal inquiries opened files long buried. Arrests followed. Board members, city officials, contractors. Graham Everett resigned before charges were finalized. His legal team went silent. And for the first time in decades, land titles were returned to the people they were stolen from. But it was more than justice. It was reclamation. The lot where Morgan's home once stood became a gathering ground. Volunteers showed up with supplies. Architects donated blueprints. The city voted to convert the space into a community center, with Morgan asked to lead its vision. She declined the title, but accepted the mission. On the day of groundbreaking, her mother placed the charred locket into a foundation capsule. "Let them know where this began," she said. Her brother, now home for good, painted a mural of Morgan on the back wall, bright, unyielding, watching over the courtyard. Every stone laid felt like an echo of resistance. Every child who played in the dust carried a new name. Future. Morgan's home was rebuilt, modest but filled with warmth. The windows let in the sun. Her kitchen smelled like her mother's cooking again. Laughter returned. And then, one afternoon, Graham came. He arrived without announcement, walking slowly, dressed not in power, but in quiet. Morgan met him outside the community site. He held no papers, no guards. "I came to return something," he said. She crossed her arms. "You return the land. What else is left?" He pulled something from his coat. A faded photograph. Her father, standing with a group of activists decades ago. Graham was among them, younger, uncertain. "He helped me once," Graham said. "Taught me how to listen. I forgot." Morgan took the photo, eyes moistening. "You destroyed what he built. I tried to rebuild it. Too late." She studied him. "Why come now?" He exhaled. "Not to be forgiven. To witness." Their conversation was brief. No apologies. No promises. Just a shared pause. When he turned to leave, he said only, "Some victories aren't loud. Some stay in stone." Morgan stood watching until he disappeared down the street. Weeks passed. The community center rose from foundation to frame. Walls painted. Bookshelves stocked. Classrooms filled with donated supplies. A small music room was added, named after Miss Adelaide. The old teacher had passed quietly in her sleep just days after reading about Morgan's triumph. Morgan gave speeches, not to media, but to children. She told them stories about dreams worth chasing, about voices too strong to bury, about doors that needed to be opened. She no longer needed headlines. She had purpose. On the eve of the center's opening, Morgan arrived early. The building glowed under warm lights. Murals of the neighborhood's past and future covered the walls. In the garden, volunteers had planted a tree where her front porch used to be. As she approached the door, she noticed something taped there. A note. Her name on the outside. She opened it. 4 words. Familiar handwriting. "Thank you for the key. Signed, G." She folded the note carefully, slid it into her pocket, and opened the door. Because sometimes victory didn't roar. Sometimes it whispered. As Morgan steps into the completed community center, she finds a handwritten note from Graham on the door. "Thank you for the key." The story's end opens the door to reflection, and perhaps redemption. When the door opened, she realized she was no longer the poor girl. They were all children of the truth she spoke. The morning sunlight filtered through the tall windows of the community center, spilling warmth onto the freshly painted floors. Children ran across the wide hallways, their laughter bouncing off the walls like music. Mothers chatted over donated coffee. An elder showed a boy how to plant seeds in the garden out back. Morgan Hayes sat in a wooden chair by the window, the same one salvaged from her old home, restored and polished. She watched, not with ownership, but with awe. This wasn't just a building. It was memory, turned into something permanent, something public. She sipped from a mug, simple, chipped, familiar, and felt the hum of life returning. Weeks had passed since the center opened. Each day it grew busier. Volunteers, teachers, visitors. And yet, somehow, it always felt like home. Morgan didn't run it. She didn't need to. She had built something that now breathed on its own. She looked toward the far corner of the room, where her brother was teaching a writing workshop. He caught her eye, grinned, and flashed her a thumbs up. Her mother arrived, carrying a basket of warm bread, immediately surrounded by smiling kids. This was the aftermath of courage. Not noise, but peace. Morgan leaned back and let her thoughts wander, not to what was, but to what had been fought for. Speaking truth had cost her almost everything. Her name had been dragged through dirt, her family displaced, her mentor attacked, her own spirit nearly shattered. But it had given her something too, something worth more than headlines or applause. It had given her people, and it had given them each other. In the corner of her pocket, she still kept Graham's note. Thank you for the key. He had not returned since that day. But his buildings were being reassessed, his policies dismantled. More importantly, his silence had given way to consequence. Power without conscience, she now knew, always collapses eventually, whether by force, by failure, or by truth. Morgan turned toward the door of the center. She stared at it quietly. It was just wood and hinges. But to her, it was a symbol. A door had almost become the end of her. And now, it marked the beginning for everyone else. She thought of all the doors people feared to open, doors of honesty, of justice, of pain. She thought of the voices still hidden behind them. Then she stood, walked slowly to the podium in the community room, and tapped the mic gently. People turned. Conversations softened. Children paused. I want to say something, she said, voice even. Everyone listened. I used to think courage was noise, protest, fire, rage. But now I know. Courage is persistence. Courage is staying when you're told to leave. Speaking when silence is safer. Building when everything has been taken from you. She paused. This place didn't begin with a building. It began with a sentence. One truth, spoken out loud. She looked around the room. Silence preserves comfort. But voice builds community. Her eyes locked with those in the crowd. I don't ask you to be loud. I ask you to be honest. What door are you afraid to open? Whose truth needs to be heard? The room was quiet, but something in it shifted. People sat straighter. Eyes widened. One woman nodded through tears. Morgan stepped back. The applause wasn't thunderous. It was warm. It was real. Later, as the sun dipped low and cast golden light through the glass, Morgan walked through the garden, her fingers grazing the edge of the locket now buried in the soil. She wasn't a leader. She wasn't a hero. She was just a girl who chose not to disappear. And, somehow, that was enough to change everything. Thank you for walking this story with me. If something in Morgan's journey moved you, if it reminded you of a voice silenced or a truth still waiting to be spoken, leave a comment. Whose voice should we hear next? What door will you open? We're listening. Courage begins as a whisper, but it doesn't end there. It builds. It restores. And it belongs to all of us.